The afternoon rain drummed softly against the bakery windows as Margaret wiped down the display counter. After 30 years of running Sweet Haven Bakery, she knew every crack in the wooden floor, every story hidden in the walls. At 58, she'd made peace with her quiet life, just her, the ovens, and the steady rhythm of measuring flour and folding dough. The bell above the door chimed, and a man rushed in, shaking raindrops from his dark hair. He was perhaps 40, dressed in a navy suit that suggested corporate meetings, not neighborhood bakeries. But it was the little girl in his arms who caught Margaret's attention, maybe 4 years old, with blonde pigtails and the brightest smile Margaret had seen in years. "Welcome to Sweet Haven," Margaret said warmly. "What can I get you folks today?" The man set the child down gently, and she immediately pressed her nose against the glass case, her eyes wide with wonder at the rows of cupcakes and cookies. "We need a birthday cake," he said, his voice carrying a weight Margaret recognized. She'd heard it before, in her own voice, years ago. The sound of someone carrying more than they could bear. "When's the party?" Margaret asked, pulling out her order book. "Saturday, 5 days from now." He paused, watching his daughter point excitedly at a chocolate cupcake. "Her mother passed away 8 months ago. This will be Emma's first birthday without her." Margaret's hand stilled on the page. She looked at the little girl, Emma, who was now humming to herself, oblivious to the grief in her father's words. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said quietly. The man, he'd introduced himself as David, nodded. "Emma keeps asking when Mommy's coming to her party. I've tried explaining, but..." He ran a hand through his hair. "She's so young. She doesn't understand." Margaret knew about loss. Her husband had died 15 years ago, and though time had softened the edges, she remembered those early months when breathing felt like work. "Children hold on to what they remember," Margaret said gently. "The love doesn't disappear just because someone does." David's eyes met hers, and something shifted. "Can I ask you something? And please feel free to say no. It's going to sound strange?" Margaret waited, her baker's intuition telling her something important was coming. "Emma keeps talking about wanting a mommy at her birthday party. Not her real mother. She understands somehow that Mommy's gone. But she wants the idea of a mommy. Someone to cut the cake with me. Someone to sing to her." He took a breath. "Would you consider pretending, just for the week leading up to her party? Coming to dinner a few times, being there on Saturday? I know it's unusual. I'll pay you, of course." Margaret should have said no. It was odd, perhaps even inappropriate. But she looked at Emma, who had turned away from the cupcakes and was now staring at Margaret with those enormous blue eyes. And something ancient and maternal stirred in her chest. "I don't want money," Margaret heard herself say, "but I'll help your daughter have a happy birthday." The relief that flooded David's face told Margaret she'd made the right choice. That evening, Margaret sat in David's living room, a comfortable home that still bore traces of the woman who'd lived there. Family photos lined the mantel, and Margaret could see Emma's mother had been lovely, with the same blonde hair as her daughter. "Her name was Rachel," David said, following Margaret's gaze. "We met in college. 20 years together." "Tell me about her," Margaret said, and he did. Over tea, while Emma played with her dolls nearby, David talked about his late wife, her laugh, her terrible singing voice, how she'd burned every dinner but made the world's best breakfasts. Margaret listened, understanding that sometimes grief needs a witness. Over the next few days, Margaret closed the bakery early and came to dinner. She helped Emma with a puzzle, read her bedtime stories, and taught her how to frost cupcakes, letting the little girl make a glorious mess of the kitchen. David watched from the doorway, and Margaret could see him remembering, grieving, and slowly beginning to heal. On the third evening, as they washed dishes together, David said, "Thank you for this. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to share this with. Being both parents, it's lonely." Margaret dried a plate carefully. "After my Henry died, I threw myself into the bakery. Work was easier than feeling. But you can't outrun grief, David. You can only walk through it one day at a time." "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you keep going?" "I baked," Margaret said simply. I got up every morning and measured flour. I mixed butter and sugar. I created sweetness when everything felt bitter. And slowly, very slowly, I remembered that life could still be good. Different, but good. Saturday arrived with clear skies and autumn sunshine. Emma's party was in the backyard, with balloons and streamers and a dozen children running through fallen leaves. Margaret stood beside David as they brought out the cake, 3 tiers decorated with butterflies, Emma's favorite. As they sang Happy Birthday, Emma stood on her chair, clapping and beaming. When it came time to make a wish, she closed her eyes tight, then blew out her candles with determination. What did you wish for, sweetheart? David asked. Emma looked at Margaret, then at her father. I wished for happy, she said simply. Later, after the children had gone home and Emma had fallen asleep, clutching a new stuffed animal, Margaret prepared to leave. She'd kept her promise. The week was over. Stay for coffee? David asked. Please? They sat on the back porch, watching the sunset, and Margaret realized she didn't want this to end either. Not because of the arrangement, but because somewhere in the measuring and mixing the stories and the shared silences, something real had grown. You gave my daughter her joy back, David said quietly. You gave me something too. Hope, maybe? The feeling that life doesn't have to be just survival. Margaret smiled. You did the same for me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. To be part of a family. This doesn't have to end, David said, and the question in his eyes was gentle, hopeful. No pretending, just us, if you'd like. Margaret looked at the house, glowing warm with lamplight. She thought of her empty apartment above the bakery, and of this little girl who'd crawled into her lap that very afternoon and fallen asleep, trusting and content. She thought of David, who'd loved deeply and was learning to love again. I'd like that very much, Margaret said. Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. Sometimes it takes the courage of a desperate father and the kindness of a stranger who isn't really a stranger at all. And sometimes, in the space of 1 week, you discover that family isn't just what you're born into. It's what you choose, what you build, and what grows in the warm soil of human connection. Emma got her wish after all.